White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt speaking to reporters about that two-week ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran. The White House taking a victory lap of sorts, saying that the president's rhetoric led to the ceasefire with Iran. The press secretary also sharing some news there that the first round of peace talks between the U.S. and Iran will happen in Pakistan this Saturday. I want to bring in Monica Alba at the White House for us. Monica, you saw the press secretary there trying to draw this distinction between what she views as what Iran is saying publicly, the reporters are picking up on, and what she says Iran is saying privately, sort of in these back-channel conversations. As it relates in particular to the Strait of Hormuz, the idea that they have now closed it off once again when that was such a sticking point to this deal. If, in fact, that remains true and the strait remains closed, is this deal up in smoke?
It does seem like it's point one of this potential deal, Laura. That critical waterway is essential to really securing a potential framework here that the White House, you just heard there moments ago, has pushed back on what has publicly been shared as a possible 10-point deal or a 15-point deal. And the number one point on most of what has been floated publicly by other countries and parties is ensuring safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. But right now, there are many questions about how that could actually work, with reports from Iranian state media that right now it's not even open because Iran is responding to the continued Israeli airstrikes into Lebanon, which the White House press secretary just confirmed. She says Lebanon is not part of the ceasefire agreement that has been brokered. The press secretary continued to say that this is an extremely fragile peace. That's language that we have heard from Vice President Vance today, who has talked about this. And on that note, a big headline coming from the White House today, which is the news that Vice President Vance, along with Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, will be traveling to Islamabad, to Pakistan, for the first round of those diplomatic talks on Saturday morning local time. Right now, the vice president is traveling in Hungary. He's wrapping up a two-day visit there where he was essentially campaigning for Viktor Orban. But he is now going to be, we understand, in Pakistan on Saturday to take part in these talks that, again, are still very, very tenuous and very fragile because of that issue, specifically on the Strait of Hormuz, Laura. So I think that is a very essential part of this, and one that Karoline Leavitt was asked repeatedly about in terms of this idea that the president has floated for a few days now on whether the U.S. and Iran could potentially enter into what the president called a joint venture when it comes to tolling those ships, those tankers that could pass through the strait. That's something that the White House continues to say is a possibility, but there are just no specifics on how that would work in reality, Laura.
And Monica, obviously sending the vice president would sort of just underscore the significance and the importance for this White House. But what would be the deliverable, if you will? What would be sort of the main goal out of talks like that? And if they can't reach it, isn't it a risky move to have the vice president sort of on the line for this?
It certainly is. It would be the most high-profile U.S. official who has been to Pakistan in years, number one. And setting that aside, it does set up the potential for, if there is a stalemate or if the ceasefire, as fragile as it is right now, falls apart altogether, what could actually be accomplished. It's also a situation where we know they're trying to kind of put all of these talks, Laura, into a two-week window. But the idea of the vice president of the United States really staying for longer than a short period of time in these talks, I think, would be quite remarkable. So this is likely a situation where maybe the vice president will be there to kick off the talks for the initial rounds, it sounds like. And then really it would be Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner who continue what we know these talks usually look like. They're intensive, hours-long sessions that turn into days, again, on really key points, like Iran asking for all U.S. combat forces to withdraw from the country and from nearby, and to deal with all of these other major issues as it relates to sanctions and as it relates to Iran seeking damages or reparations potentially for some of the damage, all of which the United States has not yet agreed to.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.